In vet med, many of us long for community and instead find ourselves isolated in clinics or unsure where we belong. But what if community isn't something you stumble into, but something that you build? Today, we're going to talk about belonging, connection, and finding your people in veterinary medicine. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Addie Reinhard.
And I'm Ginger Templeton.
We're both vets who stepped out of full-time clinical practice, but we're still deeply rooted in the profession.
And this is Out of Practice, a podcast where we talk honestly about life in and out of vet med.
This podcast is brought to you by MentorVet.
Oh my God. listeners, Addie just did.
We recorded two episodes back to back.
I said, should we change clothes? And she said, no, as it was counting us down. And yes, we are so high tech that it counts us down. 5, 4, 3. And at 3, she whips off her flannel to reveal her black, very cute, by the way. Like you're having like a Steve Jobs kind of moment with your black t-shirt.
Mm-hmm. It's actually, it's like green, which is weird, but it's like, forest green. But nice. Yes, I decided at the last minute that I wanted to have a different outfit. For the video listeners, they need to see something different. But yeah, that was a moment. That was
fantastic. All right, let's go.
Yeah, let's dig in. Okay. So yeah, we're talking about finding community in vet med?
Inside vet med. Yeah. So last episode, we just talked about, we kind of went on a tangent. We started out talking about whether or not to refer to your hospital or your work as a family. And we found our way to building community, which I think is so important. So we decided we would talk a little bit more about finding community inside of vet med, inside of the profession, which takes us away from our outside of work, life outside of work theme. But I think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to say this. I wanted nothing to do with vet med, family, culture, community early in my career. I very much was like, work, go home, separate. What about you?
Same. I think I've always I started off vet school and that very much that mindset, like go to class, do my studying, go in, take tests, come home and have my life outside of it. And then I think in year 2, I realized that was kind of a little bit lonely place to be, because I realized I knew none of my classmates very well. And I didn't really feel like I belonged because I had created the situation in which I wasn't engaging at all with my classmates. And so I think in vet med, I think I felt very siloed when I first graduated. I think I felt very alone because I only had the clinic, and a lot of my classmates, just kind of went off and did their own thing, and we didn't really talk a whole lot. And so I think I unintentionally felt very siloed early on. And not that I didn't want community, but I just didn't have it and didn't know how to get it.
I share that experience. So a little different in that my first 2 years of vet school, I had just a great group of friends. Like I had a lot of fun those first 2 years. There's a New Yorker cartoon where there's a physician and he's talking to his patient about how much fun med school was. And it's kind of this negative thing, like you're not supposed to have fun in med school. It's supposed to be really hard. I think about that all the time. Like, oh, I had a lot of fun the first 2 years of vet school. Like, oh. And then I started my family and everything changed. And I was, not as integrated into those friendships. I will still say 3rd and 4th year of vet school, I felt a sense of community, especially 4th year, and even had some, professors who I still consider friends to this day. But going out into practice, I moved. So I moved states. And I moved to a small town, and I just felt like I was the only new graduate in the world that had children. Obviously not true, but I felt that way. And just lonely. And not being in the state of Wisconsin, I didn't even really feel comfortable if I had clinical questions to reach out to advisors and mentors. I could have, and occasionally I would send an email or something, but I don't think it was the same as if I had stayed in Madison and practiced locally. And I think I had a bad attitude, if I'm being honest. Like, I think there was a little bit of like parent burnout and sort of, what's the word? Like I thought my circumstances were so much harder. I didn't like appreciate, shared suffering in the world. And, that everybody has tough things going on. So I think there was this sense of like, oh, woe is me. And again, I don't even know if it was that I didn't want community within the profession, but I just didn't feel like it was available. Now I feel completely the opposite.
I would say that attitude my first year early on was definitely, yeah, I don't need community. I don't need community here. Like, I'm here to do my work. I think starting out, I think I didn't know I needed it, and then I started to crave it, and I started to crave connection. And it's funny because that's kind of like one of the things that led me to creating MentorVet in the first place was like when I was experiencing burnout, my response was like, okay, like I need to talk to somebody in the field about this, but I don't know who. And I would try to reach out to, different places that I might find community, and I couldn't find it. I feel like now I feel more connected than ever, which is nice. I think I think that's kind of probably a side effect of working in the veterinary industry, and a lot of the people who work in industry roles in vet med. There's definitely like a community feel to that. And you have your friends that I see some of the people that I see at vet conferences, some of my friends, more than I see the people that live in the same town as me. And
Right. Same.
yeah,
Same.
it's kind of funny because I can have friends, from all over the country that I have intentional hangout time during these
Yes.
conferences, and I'm
Yeah.
at all these conferences, and it's definitely been nice to have that community. But I think it was harder for me whenever I was, in my first 4 or 5 years in practice. And yeah, I think as far as like finding that, because maybe that's the next step of like, how did I get here? And not just like, okay, how did I get here working in industry and being well connected? But I remember starting out. So when I left practice and started my master's program, the first thing I recognized was that I needed to start doing more networking and connection with people in the industry. So I like did the thing, created the LinkedIn account, and I started getting. Oh,
I
go
just am going to
ahead.
interrupt you and say, I wonder how many of our listeners just turned off. They heard
Yeah, I
networking and they
know.
were like, I'm out.
Yeah, networking. I'm
Stick
out.
with us.
No,
Stick with us.
yeah, stick with us. I'll use a different term than networking.
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, no, I know. Finding people in the profession that, yeah, finding community. So I created the LinkedIn account. I started getting involved locally. So I reached out to like my Kentucky Veterinary Medical Association. They had like a Power of 10 program, which was awesome. So it was like a leadership program for young vets. And of course, I'm like, I don't feel like a leader, but that's the point. And so I signed up for that and kind of got to know a handful of my kind of fellow early career vets in Kentucky, which was so nice to just have in-person connection time with others in the profession. And then I went to some conferences like Veterinary Leadership Conference and felt really connected there. AVMA hosted like a well-being summit, and I started meeting more people there. And then I went to Veterinary Innovation Summit and just like met all these amazing people that kind of kickstarted my career in MentorVet. And I think for me, it was just like showing up in those spaces and just kind of finding people, through whether that be going to talks or like just kind
Right.
of bumping into people during, those networking night
Yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
terrifying. I would just go and show up and try to meet people. And that's kind of how I found a lot of my community in VetMed. How did you go about finding yours?
Yeah, it was a complete accident, really. I would say similar to you. First, I should say I had such a positive experience building community in different ways outside of vet med in Raleigh. So when my family moved from Statesville, North Carolina, small town, to Raleigh, North Carolina, um, my daughter is a cancer survivor. I think we've mentioned that before on the podcast. And so initially, I was doing fundraising for pediatric cancer research, and it just opened a lot of doors to meet people with like-minded approaches to the world to me at that time. And then from there I started running, still kind of around fundraising for cancer research. I met a lot of runners. So I found myself building these like little communities around hobbies, interests, values, unrelated to vet med. And it didn't occur to me that I could be doing the same thing in the profession. And it was fine. Like I was happy. I was at different phases of burnout and and more positive phases with work. But I realized that um I was dealing with burnout, and I started to address my burnout as I kind of went on that journey. I saw a lot of friends in vet med that were burning out, that were leaving the profession. So I got really interested in that. So I wouldn't say that I set out to build community in vet med, or even recognize that that was something that I needed or was lacking, but I wanted to help and contribute. And that's how I found myself to the program at the University of Tennessee that you and I met in. And from there, we met a friend named Dave. And Dave, is not a veterinarian, but has worked in the industry for 25 years in lab side, PIM side, all kinds of product development stuff. And he was so intentional in that program. And again, this is the Veterinary Human Support Certificate at the University of Tennessee Department of Social Work. This colleague of ours, this person in our cohort, was so intentional about his own networking. And it really was not schmaltzy, cheesy, I need to make contacts so I can further my career. It was very much, I want to meet people and talk to them and learn about them.
Yeah,
And
very
then maybe
relational. Yeah.
completely relational. And I think people don't know what to do with that. Like they don't necessarily believe it in the beginning, but then they started to see how sincere he was. And honestly, he could connect with anybody. And I think I had that connection with him for similar reasons. And he pushed me to start talking to people, mostly because at that time I was interested in how I could do more to support people with the skills that I was getting at UT and also outside of vet med. And I started talking to people. At the time it was COVID. So I'd have Zoom call with, an executive at this consolidator or with a software engineer at this company, so many different people. And I am an introvert. I think I'm going to say that in every episode. I am an introvert, but I found that, I really enjoy these conversations. And if I approach them with curiosity, like what can I know about this person? What can I learn? What don't I know? And the more people that I met in vet med that weren't veterinarians, the more fun I had because I started to learn about like all these different careers, all these different like ways of being in the profession. But then eventually it was conferences. So as the world opened back up and I started going to conferences and speaking sometimes, but not always, boothing for Pride VMC, and just realizing how much I like veterinarians, how much if I'm not going into it with any type of agenda, just learning like, who are you? What's your story? I don't know, for me, I'm always going to want to talk to a veterinarian or somebody in the profession and just learn about them. And so now, just as you said, I can go to a conference, I can go to a city, and there's probably somebody there. Just last week, I don't think we talked about this. I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I went up for personal reasons, but I have a specialist there. I have a couple of specialists there. So I spent some time with one of my doctors. I drove down to Chicago to see our mutual friend, Jesse.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, yeah. And just realizing that maybe I don't have quite the community here in Raleigh that I crave, but I'm building it. But also, thankfully, we can travel and see friends
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I think for us in the positions that we are in is a little bit easier. It's like, I remember it being harder when I was, working full time and had 2 weeks of vacation and didn't
Yeah, let's
feel
talk about that.
yeah, didn't feel like I was able to travel as much for conferences. And the last thing I wanted to do was like go to a vet conference. So I was usually just going to one for CE. But I think, even for me, I think doing like something like the Power of 10 program in Kentucky with the KVMA, like that was kind of in my time off, but it was so worth it because I like was able to connect with other veterinarians and meet people who are going through very similar things as me. And it was just so helpful to not feel so alone and siloed. And so I think sometimes like the inherent nature of our work, and I was even thinking about this yesterday as I got off my shift, and when I drove into the shift, the sun was rising, and when I was driving home from my shift, the sun was setting, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm in this vet clinic all day that has no windows and exam rooms where there's no sunlight, and I just spent the entire day just not connected with anybody but who walked into that door." And so I think there's this acknowledgement that sometimes, even though we don't have the energy for it, it is something that we need. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about specifics, right? So if I am 2 years into my career, I'm an early career vet, because this is like Mentor Vet's bread and butter, right? Like I say we, you all, I used to spend way more time being involved with Mentor Vet, but Mentor Vet is focused on all stages of the profession now, but initially that core focus was the early career vet. So you're 2 years out, 1 year out, you're in a new town, you're feeling a little bit isolated. Maybe you don't even realize you're listening to this podcast and you're not even thinking that you need to build veterinary community, but it appeals to you as you hear us talk about it. And you have 2 weeks vacation. By the way, does anybody have 2 weeks vacation anymore? As I look, like I extend a lot of job offers to veterinarians, and I feel like we've gotten better on benefits.
yes, I think we have. I think there's still probably some privately owned hospitals or even some corporate hospitals that maybe only offer a couple weeks at the start.
Yeah,
So
maybe so. And I don't mean
yeah,
to, yeah.
we've gotten
So,
better, but I know my
but,
first job, I had 1 week of vacation for the first year. And that was 10
oh,
years ago, but
same. And I was pure production. I mean, it was technically pro-sal with negative accrual.
yeah, okay. That's
And
not
so
great.
essentially pure production, and 2 weeks vacation, no sick time. I think no sick time. I had a good
Yeah.
schedule though. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. The point is this. Maybe you're a little burnt out. You don't want to go to a big
Yeah.
conference, but you rattled off 4 or 5 conferences, and it hit me. Those small niche focus conferences often do have an emphasis on networking. So do
Yes.
you want to talk about VLC and VIS maybe?
Yeah. So Veterinary Leadership Conference, hosted by AVMA, every year in January in Chicago. What a lovely.
I love it. Okay, listen, I'm here for it. I love the cold. It's still decorated for Christmas because it's the first week. Chicago, I was just there. Chicago is gorgeous at Christmas time. So
Yeah,
I know
Chicago's
it sounds
nice. Yeah.
bad, but then also you're all in the one hotel. So it's not
Yes.
like you're going out unless you choose to and doing it. You're right there in
Yes.
the lakeshore. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Are you speaking this year at
I
VLC?
am. Yes. I'm
Okay,
doing like a flash mentorship session, which is essentially like speed networking. So,
love it. I love
so
it.
yeah, if you're looking for friends, come to my session. No, that conference is great.
Seriously.
It's small enough that you can meet a lot of people. It's generally, the community there is phenomenal. Everybody is so friendly. I really have been to it every year because that was what my master's was in, was leadership. And so I was like, oh, this is the right conference for me. And I've just, the topics are great. The community's great. Veterinary Innovation Summit was also lovely.
Let's
Sorry,
stay
go
with
back.
VLC for a
Okay.
quick minute though, because maybe I don't, this will probably not air before it happens, but if it happens to, some people who are close by may decide to go. I just had one of my team members last minute decide to attend.
Oh, cool.
And I do want to say they have a mentorship pairing program. So you can choose to be a mentor or a mentee. And, it's just while you're there, right? But it's a way to kind of give you an hour container to meet somebody you wouldn't know otherwise. I met a neurologist from in academia, like somebody I wouldn't have run into. Is great the last time I was there. And then they do the activities, we're going to call them. I think they probably still call them networking events, but it is such that people like you, people like me, people like, I think about like Gary Marshall, AVMA vice president, like come into those rooms really trying to seek people out and include. So it's not totally on the attendee to make it happen. It's not perfect, especially if you're super, super shy. But again, VLC, I think, is a great conference that flies under the radar. All right, now VIS.
Yeah, Veterinary Innovation Summit. I went the first time probably in 2022. I think that was like the first conference I went to after, maybe it's 2021, I can't remember. No, 2022, my first conference from after COVID. And the community there was phenomenal. It's a lot of industry movers and shakers, and a lot of people who have, I think, a lot of good ideas and also ask good questions. And I met some of my best mentors at that conference, and it just kind of happened to run into somebody and had a great conversation, and then it turned into a great mentoring relationship. So I think that that is also a great one, is kind of like a smaller conference as well, that lends itself nicely to meeting people who really share this kind of desire to meet others and have that community.
Well, and I think we should emphasize the focus of VIS is very different than your typical clinical CE. It is very much around innovation, as the name states. It also, I don't know if there's actual race approved CE. I feel like the last time I looked, maybe
I'm not
can you
sure.
earn? So
I
look
have
at
no
that.
clue. Look that
But
up.
if there
Yeah.
are people listening, I get this question all the time, how do I move from a clinical role into a non-clinical role? And I think we touched on that in one episode, and maybe should spend more time on that because it's such a common question. But I think if that's something that's at all on your radar, VIS could be an interesting place to spend a little time and meet people. It may not provide you the ultimate solution because it's, there are a lot of ways to be in a non-clinical role, but that might be something to think about.
Well, and I think circling it back around, so like something you said earlier about how you kind of started creating your community in vet med is like doing it from a relational standpoint, and like, reaching out to people and just interviewing them just for the sake of getting to know them and understanding what they do in vet med and what does their job look like, especially if you're looking at transitioning out of clinical practice. It can be so helpful to understand their day to day and realize, some of the challenges. And I that's where I kind of always like to spend a lot of my conversations, like what is hard about your work right now, or where are you finding challenges, and talking through that with somebody is nice, and just being like a good listener. And again, I think when networking or community building or whatever we want to call it, if it starts to feel icky, it's usually when one person is trying to get something out of the other person. I'm
Yeah,
like,
you have an
okay,
agenda.
this is,
It's
this
transactional.
feels transactional suddenly. I don't really want to talk to you because I feel like you're trying to get something out of me. So I think on the flip side, if you're, even if you are interested in transitioning to more of an industry role, like coming to those conversations more from a relational standpoint. And that's how I approach kind of every relationship with MentorVet, is like, maybe we need to collaborate. I don't know. But first I'm going to get to know you as a human being and see if I, get along well with you. And then maybe down the road, a year or two from now, if something comes up that makes sense to collaborate on, then cool, like we can chat. And now suddenly we have this foundation of a relationship that we've built. But yeah. And I want to pivot just like slightly, but I just want to make sure you didn't want to add. Oh, I think for those of you who are kind of out there and like, oh, I can't go to a conference, or I only have one CE thing to do, virtual. There's like more and more ability for us to connect virtually than ever. And like you mentioned, setting up meetings with people when you were trying to build community on Zoom, like you can still do that now. And I think a lot of the new people that I'm meeting these days are on virtual chat. And so don't be afraid to find community virtually. A lot of the allied organizations also have kind of virtual meetups and things like that. So I think
So
it's not
I want
real.
to
Or
I want
like,
to pause
oh, yeah.
with what you just said. I want to explore that just a little bit further. That was in my mind the next thing I wanted to talk about. So you said a lot of the
We're on the same
allied
page. Yeah.
organization. I know it's crazy, it's scary for you, but allied organizations, affinity groups. So I, to this day, will mention Pride VMC or, one of any other groups, and get from the person that I'm talking to kind of a blank stare. And I realize that we are in this kind of circuit almost of, like industry and industry adjacent. There are so many people in our profession who don't know these groups exist to take advantage of them. So I don't want to leave anybody out because there's so many, and they all serve a different, purpose. But I think that one, we should probably have Jacob add a bunch in the show notes. I frequently will mention Pride VMC because it's really an important organization to me. So Pride VMC is an LGBTQ plus affinity group that has been around for over 30 years. I think 32 or 33 now, which is just amazing. And I would say, even if you don't consider yourself to be part of the LGBTQ community personally, but are an ally, you have family, perhaps you're a parent, and are, dealing with parenting a child in that community, this group can have quite an impact. And there are probably 24 others that, meet different needs and different niches. So do you want to maybe rattle off a few and then we can link some in the show notes?
Yeah, one that came to mind immediately was Possibilities Vet Med, the
Yes, yeah,
mentoring
same.
network for underrepresented groups and
So that's
Vet Med.
Possibilities,
Possibilities.
PAWS.
Uh-huh.
I'll spell the rest of that. You
yeah.
can get there.
It'll be in the show notes. Yeah, Possibilities Vet Med is free mentoring network for underrepresented groups, led by Dr. Valerie Marcano, and just been like a great resource and place for individuals that, maybe, and it doesn't even have to be like, somebody that's BIPOC. It could be, somebody who is a veteran or is entering vet med as a second career and is, not a traditional age for a
Yes, yeah.
veterinarian. So it can be
She's
any
saying you're old like me.
any underrepresented group. So that one, multicultural VMA, pretty much, any of the like Black TVM network. We'll list a bunch in the show
Yeah,
notes,
we need to
but
list them because there's so
yeah.
many. And I really, if you're listening and you are on leadership with one of these groups, or you know of or a member, send to us, right? Because we just want people to know what's out there, and there is so much available. And I think approaching membership in these groups, kind of like we were talking about before, not in a transactional way, not with an agenda, maybe even with a what can I provide? If you're in burnout, if you're struggling, show up, look for help, right? But if you're not in that place, but you just want community, coming in and thinking like, what can I offer? And you may not know what they need, right? But just being curious and asking that question. For me, I felt a little weird joining, Pride VMC in the early days. And not so weird joining, but they were looking for booth volunteers at VMX. And I thought, well, I'm married to a cisgender heterosexual guy. So it was kind of weird. Like, do I make sense in the booth? And the reality is, my sexuality aside, I'm the mom to 2 LGBTQ teens, now young adults. And being in that booth at VMX, so many moms and dads came up to me and were dealing with parent issues, kids transitioning, kids, thinking about gender or hormones or whatever the issue was. And I didn't know that that was going to happen. I couldn't have predicted that, but they needed help. I volunteered and it worked out. And I got so much more out of that than I think I gave. But I didn't show up to get it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we should jot down that volunteering would be a good future episode to talk about, because something that's, I think, underrated at times. Like, people don't think, I'm burnt out, I should volunteer, but I'll tell you that when I was experiencing severe burnout, volunteering in something outside of vet med was one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done, probably in my life. And so, yeah, I think we underestimate giving back our time and to help others as like a way to feel fulfilled, I think. But that really helped me. But I think we're nearing the end. So any final big takeaways?
That sounded ominous. We're nearing the end.
We're nearing the end of the episode.
I think the takeaway for me is just that there are so many opportunities out there to find a community within vet med. Some of it may be local. We didn't talk a ton about that, but you talked about Power of 10. A lot of VMAs have a Power of 10 option or something like that. Some of it may be, you have to seek out an affinity group. You may seek out a conference. Some of it may just be starting out in social media, but I would caution people to try to move some of it to real life communication, right? Like actual, not behind the screen all the time. And kind of like we said in the last episode, if it sounds scary and intimidating, do it anyway. Put yourself out there and do it scared, and you might find